Well, thanks again for having me. I've got a ton of slides here, but I have my timer on, so I will promise to try to keep it to 10 minutes. And there's a lot here that we won't go through in detail. This first slide really just shows the history of climate action at the University of Michigan, some of the major milestones that we hit. We set our first goals for GHG reduction in around 2011, and just recently met those through a couple actions at our power plant and through purchase power. And around 2019, as we knew we were going to hit that 2025 goal, the former president launched what was called the President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality, or PCCN. This is the task that the charge that the commission was given. I think it's pretty straightforward. That some of the more interesting elements, I think, are that the president was adamant that the plan involved the regional community, that the solutions that we developed were scalable and transferable, and not just unique to our own situation, and that all of the members of the university, the community in some way, could be accountable for the action, so it wasn't all on the administration to move it forward. This is the structure of the commission, lots and lots of moving pieces. We had a central commission that had 17 members. It included some university administrators, some faculty with varying degrees of expertise in issues of sustainability and carbon neutrality, the utility representatives, City of Ann Arbor sustainability person, some NGO representation, some student representation, and so a really diverse group of folks who didn't always agree, but we had some very robust conversation over 2 years. We also had a variety of advisors, both internal and external to the university. We did a lot of engagement with the campus community and the broader public systemically throughout the process. And really the bulk of the work and the analysis that was done came from that lower level box, where we had about 13 internal analysis teams that we set up that were led by faculty and staffed by students, some staff members on some of them as well. For some of the heavier lift technical issues around buildings and energy systems, we hired some external consultants to do that work. And then there were several topics that we just managed in-house with the commission, such as carbon offset. Happy to go into detail on any of those aspects later. Again, more words here, but we really had 3 phases of the work. The first phase, in a nutshell, was getting our feet on the ground, getting a good sense of what it was, what problems we were tackling, what the scope of the work was, getting the analysis teams structured and set up and off and running. Phase 2 was really working more closely with the various analysis teams so that we could understand what they were working on in detail, what they were thinking about proposing, giving them feedback until they delivered their reports for the various areas of their work. And the third phase was tense and interesting, and a lot of deliberation, a lot of arguing, factions forming, a lot of stakeholder engagement. We did a really robust comment review process that lasted about 2 months, maybe more, where we responded to every public comment. There were something like 700 of them. And ultimately we delivered the report to the president after refinements that followed that comment period. So in the recommendations that the commission ultimately put forth, there were 50, spanning a lot of different areas. So we had a lot of organizational and culture recommendations here, so around leadership positions, formal advisory committees, both within the institution and the external community, thinking really intentionally about stakeholder engagement practices, utilizing environmental justice, reimagining our campus master planning process through this lens and some of the other lenses that have come to the fore in recent years, such as DEI, investing in research and curriculum and training and living learning labs. So lots of different things on the organization side. In terms of the emissions reductions, the commission recommended, this was kind of a controversial recommendation, it was fairly split, to be carbon neutral by 2025 for scope 1, inclusive of offsets. That recommendation was not ultimately accepted. We can talk a little bit more about offsets and what we're thinking about with that right now. But the second recommendation was accepted, and that is to eliminate, not to offset, but to eliminate direct emissions on campus by 2040 and to exceed the science-based targets along the way. And the next recommendation was to be neutral for scope 2 emissions by 2025. That was accepted, and we were on track to do that. In terms of strategies, the commission put forth a recommendation, and this was based a lot on the consultant recommendations to start building out district level geo-exchange systems where it makes sense to do so and pivot as other solutions emerge. This is challenging for us on the central campus because we have a natural gas combined cycle power plant and we're very densely packed on the central campus, so geothermal is a little tougher there. Lots of other things here like decarbonizing the fleet, purchased electricity from renewables, revolving energy fund, carbon pricing system. A carbon tax was not endorsed by the president initially. It's going to require a lot of work with deans, as you might imagine, and revising our building standards so that they're not just focused on energy efficiency, but on embedded carbon and the full carbon life cycle. With scope 3, the recommendations were to make sure we set goals for the various categories. And a lot of that had to do with our ability to measure. Some of these are quite easy to measure using current tools. Some of them are a lot more difficult. And so right now, most of our focus is on really shoring up our accounting approaches for scope 3 to figure out which ones we can measure fairly well. And start to set goals for eliminating those. And then the recommendation from the commission was that when those are set, that they reach neutrality no later than 2040, which that goal has not been accepted yet. On the strategies for scope 3, there were a ton recommended. So there were around commuting. We have preliminary plans to connect our Ann Arbor campuses with some kind of a campus connector like light rail or high-speed rapid transit buses. So proceeding with that practice, revising parking policy to try to disincentivize driving to the extent that we can, more electrical vehicle charging, promoting rideshare and cycling and free bus access, and then of course, like most of us are doing now, telecommuting. University sponsored travel, low carbon ground transport options for shorter haul trips. So, something for us to Chicago is really on the bubble in terms of carbon emissions, that kind of length. So trying to find ways to get people moving in electric cars as opposed to getting on planes. Video conferencing instead of traveling for meetings. And again, the carbon price for travel. On the food side, plant-forward diets that are lower in carbon, solid waste, pretty straightforward, increasing capacity for composting and scaling up diversions, doing better with wastewater treatment. And then leased buildings, first and foremost, trying to use less. We don't use a ton, but our health system does. So trying to find ways when we do have to lease that we're prioritizing energy efficiency and high, low carbon intensity buildings. And implementing language in all our leasing documents that address these issues so that the landlords know that it's important to us. And then on carbon offsets, meeting the basic standards around verifiable, enforceable, compliant, and then defining and prioritizing a variety of co-benefits associated those, which might include things like research and education opportunities for our students, engagement with the local and regional communities, things of that nature. Looking for opportunities to develop our own biosequestration projects on University of Michigan lands, and then establishing a standing committee with diverse expertise to help us think through our strategy for offsets. And so this is what we ultimately adopted. As I said, eliminate emissions for scope 1 by 2040, reduce to net zero scope 2 by 2025, establish goals for scope 3, by 2025, foster a university-wide culture with justice as a core principle. And it was outside of the scope of the commission, but at the same time, along with our Board of Regents, there was a lot of work going on with our endowment. And so we have a net zero endowment goal by 2050 now as well. In terms of priorities and progress, happy to discuss any. This web page is the best place to go. We keep it up to date on all of our kind of process progress in each of the categories. And then we've created this dashboard, which I would say is the 1.0 version. And we're going to be adding to that over time with additional scope 3 emissions, more granularity at the campus and building level, so that you can really drill down into those numbers for those who want to geek out on the data. And that's all I got. And I think I did it in 10 minutes.